My name is Celeste, 32 years old, and I'm standing at the altar in my $20,000 wedding dress, looking at my maid of honor, Rachel, as she rises from her seat. 300 guests watch in the historic Hamptons church as Rachel, my best friend of 15 years, announces she's pregnant with Marcus's baby. My husband-to-be stands frozen beside me, but I just smile calmly because I've known about their affair for 3 months, and today is not about heartbreak, it's about perfect revenge. Before I tell you how this wedding became the most memorable event of the year, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit like and subscribe to hear how I turned the worst betrayal into the sweetest victory anyone has ever witnessed. 6 months before that dramatic moment in the church, my life appeared perfect from every angle. I was a successful corporate lawyer at Brennan Hayes and Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, billing $800 an hour and managing accounts worth millions. My apartment on the Upper East Side had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, decorated with modern art pieces I had collected during business trips to Europe and Asia. At 32, I had achieved everything my parents had dreamed for their daughter and more. Marcus Reynolds entered my life 3 years ago at a charity gala for the Metropolitan Museum. He was 34, devastatingly handsome with salt and pepper hair that made him look distinguished rather than old, and worked as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Our introduction felt like destiny. Two successful professionals who understood the demands of corporate life, who could discuss market trends over morning coffee and debate legal precedents over dinner. He pursued me with the intensity of someone closing a billion-dollar deal, sending flowers to my office daily until I agreed to a date. Our relationship progressed with the efficiency we both applied to our careers. Within 6 months, we were exclusive. By our first anniversary, we had moved in together, combining our lives in his larger penthouse in Tribeca. He proposed on our second anniversary during a private dinner at Le Bernardin, the ring a 3-carat diamond that caught the light perfectly, just like everything Marcus did. I said yes without hesitation, already imagining our future together, the power couple everyone would envy. Rachel had been my best friend since our first day at Columbia Law School. She was brilliant but had chosen a different path after graduation, going into marketing instead of law, saying she wanted creativity over contracts. We had supported each other through everything: failed relationships, family dramas, career changes. When I got engaged, there was no question who would be my maid of honor. Rachel screamed when I asked her, crying happy tears and immediately starting a Pinterest board for wedding ideas. The wedding planning began 8 months before the date we had chosen, the second Saturday in October, when the Hamptons would be painted in fall colors. We hired Celestine Morgan, the wedding planner, who had orchestrated the governor's daughter's wedding, and gave her a budget of $150,000. The venue was St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, a historic stone building with stained glass windows that would create perfect lighting for photographs. The reception would follow at the Meadow Club with its manicured gardens and ocean views. Every detail was meticulously planned. The flowers alone cost $15,000, white orchids and roses flown in from Ecuador. The photographer had shot for Vogue. The 8-piece band had played at 3 celebrity weddings. My dress was a custom Vera Wang creation that took 6 months to complete, with hand-sewn pearls and delicate lace that had been made by nuns in France. Marcus handled the honeymoon planning, booking us 2 weeks in Bora Bora, at a resort where each villa sat above crystal-clear water. 4 months before the wedding, I started noticing small changes in Marcus's behavior. He had always worked long hours, that was the nature of investment banking, but suddenly he had urgent meetings that ran until 2 or 3 in the morning. His phone, which used to lie carelessly on counters, was now always face down or in his pocket. When it rang, he would glance at the screen and sometimes step into another room to answer. He blamed it on a sensitive merger he was managing, confidential details that required privacy. Rachel began canceling our wedding planning sessions around the same time. She would text at the last minute with excuses about work emergencies or sudden migraines. When we did meet, she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly and cutting our meeting short. She apologized profusely each time, promising to make it up to me, suggesting that wedding planning stress was affecting everyone differently. I believed her because why wouldn't I trust my best friend? The perfume was what first made me truly suspicious. Marcus came home one night with a scent on his collar that wasn't mine. It was floral and young, nothing like the sophisticated fragrances I wore. When I asked about it, he laughed and said a colleague had sprayed too much in the elevator and he had been trapped with her for 20 floors. His explanation was smooth, delivered without hesitation, but something in his eyes flickered, a tell I recognized from depositions when witnesses lied. 3 months before the wedding on a Thursday night, when Marcus said he had a client dinner, I decided to follow him. I waited in my car outside his office building, watching the gleaming lobby through rain-splattered windows. He emerged at 7:30, but instead of getting into the town car that would take him to a restaurant, he hailed a cab. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding as the cab headed not to any restaurant, but to the Lower East Side, to an apartment building I recognized immediately. It was Rachel's. I parked across the street and waited, hoping desperately that there was an explanation that perhaps Marcus was planning some wedding surprise with my best friend's help. But when I saw them through her third-floor window, saw him pull her into his arms and kiss her with a passion I thought was reserved for me, I knew the truth. They moved away from the window, but I had seen enough. My fiancé and my best friend were having an affair. I sat in my car for an hour waiting to see if the rage would come, if I would storm up to her apartment and confront them. But instead, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock faded into something colder, more calculated. I was a lawyer trained to think strategically, to build cases, to plan several moves ahead. If they wanted to play this game, I would play it better. I drove home and poured myself a glass of wine, sitting in our living room, surrounded by wedding magazines and invitation samples. I could have confronted Marcus when he came home at midnight, his shirt untucked and hair slightly messed. I could have thrown Rachel's name in his face and watched him scramble for lies. But that would have been too easy, too expected. They deserved something more creative, more fitting for the magnitude of their betrayal. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Stan Kowalski, a private investigator who had been an NYPD detective for 20 years before going private. My firm had used him for corporate cases, and he was thorough, discreet, and had contacts everywhere. The second call was to my lawyer mentor, Patricia Chen, who specialized in family law and had handled some of the most complex divorces in New York. I needed to know my options, my protections, my advantages. Stan met me at a coffee shop in Midtown that afternoon. He was in his 50s, built like a former boxer with gray eyes that missed nothing. I explained the situation clinically as if I was briefing him on a case for a client. He listened without judgment, taking notes in a small notebook. When I finished, he asked only one question. "Do you want to know everything or just enough?" Everything, I told him. Every detail, every meeting, every lie. Patricia's advice was more complex. Since Marcus and I weren't married yet, I had more flexibility. She reviewed our financial entanglements, the joint accounts we had opened, the apartment that was in his name, but that I had contributed to. She helped me understand what I could protect and what I might lose. More importantly, she helped me understand the power of timing, of choosing when and how to reveal what I knew. For the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect fiancé. I was attentive to Marcus, planning special dinners, surprising him at work, with lunch being the woman he had fallen in love with. With Rachel, I was the excited bride, texting her about centerpiece options and bridesmaid dress fittings. Neither suspected that I knew their guilt, making them see only what they expected to see, a blissfully ignorant bride too focused on wedding planning to notice their deception. Stan's first report came a week later. The affair had been going on for 6 months, starting just 2 months after our engagement. They met twice a week, minimum sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at hotels that Marcus paid for with a credit card I didn't know existed. There were text messages, hundreds of them, some explicit, some romantic, some planning their deception. Marcus had told Rachel he was having doubts about the marriage, but couldn't call it off without a good reason, because of our social circles and business connections. The photographs were the hardest to see. Stan had captured them entering hotels, kissing in her doorway, holding hands in restaurants in Brooklyn where they thought no one would recognize them. In one photo, Rachel was wearing a necklace I recognized, a Tiffany piece that Marcus had claimed was stolen from his gym locker. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that it almost became impressive in its audacity. But Stan found something else, something that changed everything. Marcus wasn't just cheating with Rachel. There were two other women over the past year. An analyst from his firm named Jennifer, who had transferred to the London office 6 months ago after their affair ended badly. A bartender named Sophia from a club in the meatpacking district, who had been paid $20,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement when she threatened to call me. Rachel didn't know about the others. In the text messages Stan recovered, she genuinely believed she was special, that Marcus was leaving me for her after the wedding. He had promised her that he just needed to get through the ceremony for appearance's sake, then would find a reason to divorce me quickly. She was the other woman who thought she was the only other woman, a cliché wrapped in a tragedy, wrapped in what would become a spectacular revelation. 3 months before the wedding, as autumn began painting Manhattan in shades of gold and amber, I made a conscious decision that would define everything that followed. I would not be a victim. I would not cry into wine glasses with sympathetic friends or throw Marcus's belongings onto the street in a rage that would make me look unstable. Instead, I would gather evidence with the patience of a prosecutor building a case that needed to be absolutely airtight. Stan Kowalski proved to be worth every penny of his $5,000 weekly retainer. His background in the NYPD had given him connections throughout the city, from hotel concierges to bank managers who could provide information that walked the careful line of legality. He installed tracking software on Marcus's phone during one of our dinner dates, when Marcus left it on the table to use the restroom. The software cloned every text, every email, every calendar appointment to a secure server that I could access from my laptop. The digital evidence was damning beyond what I had imagined. Marcus had created separate email accounts for each woman, compartmentalizing his deceptions with the same organizational skills he used for managing multiple portfolios. The emails to Rachel were filled with promises about their future together, about the children they would have, about the house in Connecticut he would buy her once he was free from me. He sent her real estate listings, pictures of engagement rings different from mine, links to articles about starting over after divorce. What Rachel didn't know was that similar promises had been made to Jennifer before her. Stan had tracked down Jennifer in London through his contacts, and while she wouldn't speak to him directly, her best friend was more than willing to share the story after a few drinks. Marcus had promised Jennifer a promotion, a transfer to London together, a life away from the complications of New York. When she had threatened to expose him after realizing he was engaged to me, he had orchestrated her transfer and made it clear her career would be destroyed if she spoke up. The financial investigations revealed another layer of betrayal. Marcus had been siphoning money from our joint accounts, small amounts that wouldn't trigger attention, but that added up to nearly $50,000 over 6 months. The money went to a separate account that funded his affairs, paying for hotels, jewelry, romantic dinners, and even a weekend trip to Miami with Rachel that he had told me was a mandatory company retreat. 2 months before the wedding, I discovered Rachel was pregnant. She had been sloppy, leaving a pregnancy test in her bathroom wastebasket when I visited her apartment for what she thought was an impromptu girls' night. I saw it when I used her bathroom, the 2 pink lines as clear as the betrayal they represented. I took a photo with my phone, adding it to my growing folder of evidence. When I returned to her living room, I hugged her and told her she was glowing lately, watching her face flush with guilt and secret pleasure. The pregnancy changed everything. This wasn't just an affair anymore, but a complication that would force their hand. I knew Rachel well enough to know she wouldn't terminate the pregnancy. She had always talked about wanting children, had cooed over every baby we encountered, had a Pinterest board dedicated to nursery designs. Marcus, on the other hand, would panic. A baby would complicate his carefully constructed image, threaten his position at Goldman Sachs, where appearances mattered more than performance. I watched their relationship begin to fracture under the weight of this new reality. The text messages became more strained. Marcus stopped promising futures and started suggesting solutions. Rachel became more demanding, more emotional. She wanted him to call off the wedding immediately. He kept insisting they needed to wait until after, that it would be better for everyone if they maintained the facade a little longer. She threatened to tell me herself several times, but he always talked her out of it. During this time, I had to continue playing my part. I attended dress fittings with a smile, chose flowers with enthusiasm, and finalized menu selections with the attention to detail everyone expected from a Type A bride. My mother flew in from Seattle to help with preparations, staying at the St. Regis and taking me to lunches where she gushed about how proud she was, how beautiful the wedding would be, how perfect Marcus was for me. I nodded and smiled and said all the right things, while my phone contained enough evidence to destroy multiple lives. The bachelorette party 2 weeks before the wedding was perhaps my greatest performance. Rachel had organized it, the irony not lost on me, at a spa in the Berkshires. 12 women, including my sister Emma, my law school friends, and Rachel's marketing colleagues, spent the weekend getting massages and drinking champagne. Rachel was constantly nauseous, but blamed it on a stomach bug. During a particularly drunk moment, she started crying and said she had something to tell me. I held my breath, thinking this was it, but she chickened out and said she was just emotional about her best friend getting married. That night, I heard her on the phone with Marcus in the bathroom, arguing in whispers she thought were masked by the running water. She was telling him this was wrong, that I deserved to know, that she couldn't stand up next to me and pretend everything was fine. His responses were inaudible, but whatever he said worked, because she emerged with red eyes, but a forced smile, ready to continue the charade. 1 week before the wedding, I met with Patricia Chen again to finalize my legal protection. We had discovered that Marcus had been engaging in insider trading, using information from deals to make personal trades through offshore accounts. It was subtle, careful, but illegal enough to end his career and possibly land him in prison. Patricia had a contact at the SEC who would be very interested in this information, but we agreed to hold it as insurance, a nuclear option if needed. I also discovered that the officiant Marcus had insisted on using a friend from his college days, who had recently become ordained online, had let his certification lapse. The wedding would be beautiful, emotional, and completely legally invalid. When I confirmed this fact through the state registry, I actually laughed out loud in my office, causing my paralegal to peek in with concern. I waved her away, claiming wedding stress, while secretly marveling at the poetic justice of it all. Marcus's bachelor party in Atlantic City gave me a night alone to finalize preparations. I created a presentation on my laptop, a PowerPoint of betrayal, complete with photographs, text messages, financial records, and audio recordings from the cloned phone. I uploaded it to 3 different cloud services and sent encrypted copies to Stan and Patricia. I also prepared USB drives that could be distributed if necessary, each one containing enough evidence to ensure that the truth couldn't be buried or denied. I also wrote 3 letters that night. One to Rachel, explaining that I knew everything and had known for months that her pregnancy was not the secret she thought it was. One to Marcus, detailing not just his affair with Rachel, but his entire pattern of deception, including the insider trading that would be reported to authorities. And one to myself, reminding myself why I was doing this, why public humiliation was the only justice that fit the crime of such complete betrayal. The rehearsal dinner on Friday night was held at Marcus's parents' estate in Greenwich. 50 of our closest friends and family gathered for what everyone believed was a celebration of love. I gave a speech about partnership and trust, looking directly at Marcus and Rachel as I spoke about the importance of honesty in relationships. Marcus's hand was sweaty in mine. Rachel couldn't meet my eyes. His mother commented that I seemed remarkably calm for a bride, and I told her it was because I knew exactly what was about to happen. That night, Marcus tried to initiate intimacy for the first time in weeks. The guilt was finally overwhelming him, making him desperate to feel some connection that might absolve him. I declined, citing tradition about not seeing each other before the wedding. He seemed relieved, and I heard him on the phone with Rachel an hour later from the guest bathroom, assuring her that after tomorrow everything would be different. He was right about that, just not in the way he expected. The morning of October 14th dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect autumn days that wedding photographers dream about. I woke at 6 in my suite, at the Topping Rose House in Bridgehampton, surrounded by the trappings of bridal perfection. The October sun filtered through sheer curtains, casting golden light across the room, where my $20,000 Vera Wang dress hung like a ghost of the future that would never be. My phone showed 47 messages between Marcus and Rachel from the night before and early morning. He was panicking about her pregnancy, about her emotional state, about the possibility that she might not be able to maintain the facade through the ceremony. His messages grew increasingly desperate as the hours passed without her response. The last one, sent at 5:43 in the morning, simply said, "Please, Rachel, just get through today and we can figure everything out tomorrow." By 8 o'clock, my bridal suite was buzzing with activity. The makeup artist, who had worked on 3 Broadway shows, began creating the perfect bridal glow while commenting on my remarkable skin clarity for someone getting married in 6 hours. The hairstylist flown in from Los Angeles wove white orchids into an elaborate updo that would photograph beautifully from every angle. My mother, Barbara, sat in the corner, already dressed in her mother of the bride dress, a lavender creation that she had bought at Bergdorf Goodman, dabbing at her eyes every few minutes. Marcus's mother, Janet, arrived at 8:30, carrying a blue velvet box that contained the family pearls, a necklace that had been worn by Reynolds' brides for 4 generations. She clasped them around my neck with tears in her eyes, telling me how proud she was to welcome me into the family, how I was the daughter she never had. The pearls felt cold against my skin, like wearing someone else's expectations, but I smiled and thanked her, letting her take photos that would later become evidence of the day everything fell apart. Rachel arrived at 9, an hour late, her face pale and drawn. Morning sickness had been particularly brutal, though she blamed it on bad sushi from the night before. Her bridesmaid dress, which had been altered just 2 weeks ago, was already tight around her middle, though the empire waist helped disguise what I knew was hidden beneath. She avoided direct eye contact with me, focusing instead on helping the other bridesmaids with their hair and makeup. I asked Rachel to help me with my garter, a private moment between best friends that she couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. In the quiet of the bathroom, with the door closed against the chaos outside, I told her she looked beautiful, that I was so grateful to have her standing beside me on the most important day of my life. She burst into tears, which I attributed loudly enough for others to hear to wedding day emotions. What she whispered through her tears was that she didn't deserve a friend like me. I agreed with her silently while rubbing her back in comfort. At 10 o'clock, the photographer arrived with his team of 3 assistants. They orchestrated posed moments of manufactured joy. Me laughing with my bridesmaids, my mother helping with my veil, the flower girl practicing her walk. In every photo with Rachel, I made sure we were touching her hand in mine, or our arms around each other, creating a visual record of the friendship she was actively destroying. The photographer commented on our obvious bond, saying the maid of honor photos were some of his favorites. I made a private phone call to Stan Kowalski at 10:30, confirming that everything was prepared for the revelation. He had positioned himself in the church's audiovisual booth, ready to override the wedding slideshow with my carefully crafted presentation. My divorce lawyer, Patricia, would be seated in the 3rd row, disguised as a +1 for my colleague. 2 FBI agents, friends of Stan from his NYPD days, who had been following the insider trading evidence, would be waiting outside the church. Every piece was in place for what would become the most memorable wedding in Hampton's history. At 11, I put on the dress. $20,000 of French lace and hand-sewn pearls that transformed me into the bride everyone expected to see. My mother sobbed openly. The photographer's camera clicked rapidly. Rachel held my train, her hands shaking slightly as she arranged the cathedral-length veil. In the mirror, I saw myself as they saw me, radiant, excited, nervous for all the wrong reasons. None of them could see the steel beneath the silk, the rage transformed into cold calculation. My father arrived at 11:30 to escort me to the church. He had flown in from his retirement in Florida, still tan from golf courses, still uncomfortable with displays of emotion. He told me I looked beautiful, that he was proud of me, that Marcus better treat me right, or he'd have to answer to him. I almost felt sorry for him for the shock he was about to experience. But he had never been particularly interested in my life beyond financial success, so the sympathy was limited. The limousine ride to St. Andrew's Episcopal Church took 20 minutes through Saturday traffic. I sat carefully arranged to avoid wrinkling the dress while my mother fussed with my veil and Rachel stared out the window in silence. The other bridesmaids, my sister Emma and two law school friends, chatted nervously about their own relationships, filling the silence with meaningless chatter about wedding traditions and honeymoon destinations. As we pulled up to the church, I saw the guests beginning to arrive. 300 of New York's financial and legal elite, dressed in their finest, ready to witness what they believed would be the social event of the season. I recognized Marcus's boss, the managing director of Goldman Sachs, arriving with his third wife. My firm's senior partners were already inside, having flown in from various offices to attend. This wasn't just a wedding, but a networking event, a merger of two powerful careers that would create a dynasty of success. The church itself was magnificent in the October light. Built in 1879, its stone facade was covered in ivy that had turned brilliant red. The stained glass windows imported from Italy cast rainbow patterns across the lawn where photographers were already capturing arriving guests. The florist had outdone herself with white orchid arrangements flanking the entrance and rose petals scattered on the ancient steps. It was a fairy tale setting for what would become a nightmare. Inside the bridal holding room, the energy was electric with anticipation. My bridesmaids were lined up in their dusty rose dresses, bouquets in hand. The flower girl, Marcus's 5-year-old niece, was spinning in circles, watching her dress float around her. Rachel stood apart, clutching her bouquet so tightly her knuckles were white. I walked over to her, placed my hand on her arm, and told her everything would be revealed in time. She looked at me with confusion and fear, not understanding the double meaning of my words. At exactly 2 o'clock, the wedding coordinator gave the signal. The music began. Pachelbel's Canon in D, played by a string quartet from the New York Philharmonic. The flower girl went first, scattering petals with enthusiastic abandon. Then my bridesmaids, one by one, walking down the aisle with practiced smiles. Rachel went last before me, her steps unsteady, her face a mask of barely contained panic. Then came my moment. The wedding march began, and 300 guests rose to their feet. I stood at the entrance of the church, my father's arm steady under my hand, and looked down the aisle at my future. Marcus stood at the altar in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, looking handsome and nervous and guilty all at once. The sunlight through the stained glass windows created a halo effect around him, ironic considering what was about to happen. The walk down the aisle took exactly 90 seconds, though it felt like a lifetime compressed into slow motion. Each step was measured, deliberate, my smile perfectly calibrated to show joy without betraying the anticipation building in my chest. The guests' faces blurred into a watercolor of expectation and emotion. I saw my mother already crying in the front row, my father's business partners nodding approvingly, Marcus's college friends grinning with barely concealed hangovers from the bachelor party. Marcus's face was a study in contrasts as I approached. His smile was fixed, professional, the same one he used for client presentations, but his eyes darted between me and Rachel, who stood at the altar clutching her bouquet like a life preserver. Sweat beaded at his temple despite the cool October air flowing through the church. When my father placed my hand in his, Marcus's palm was clammy, his fingers trembling slightly as they closed around mine. "I love you," he whispered as I took my place beside him, the words so automatic they held no more weight than a greeting. I looked into his eyes, those green eyes that had once made me feel safe and cherished, and whispered back, "I know everything." The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint right there at the altar. But the ceremony had begun, and Father Morrison, the elderly priest who had presided over every society wedding in the Hamptons for 3 decades, was already welcoming the guests. Dearly beloved Father Morrison intoned in his resonant voice that had blessed unions and comforted mourners for longer than I had been alive. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Marcus William Reynolds and Celeste Grace Chen in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over the congregation like a benediction, but I watched Marcus's jaw clench with each phrase about truth, honor, and faithfulness. Behind me, Rachel swayed slightly, and I could hear her breathing becoming increasingly labored. My sister Emma, standing next to her, whispered to ask if she was all right. Rachel nodded quickly, but I could see her reflection in the polished brass of the altar, cross her face ghostly pale, her lips pressed together as if holding back either vomit or confession. The other bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably, sensing something off, but unable to identify the source of the tension. Father Morrison continued through the traditional ceremony, his words about the sanctity of marriage falling like drops of acid on the guilty. When he spoke about trust being the foundation of all lasting unions, Marcus actually closed his eyes briefly as if the words caused physical pain. When he mentioned the blessing of children that might come from this union, Rachel made a small choking sound that she tried to cover with a cough. The readings proceeded without incident. Marcus's cousin read from 1 Corinthians about love being patient and kind, never jealous or boastful. The irony was so thick, I nearly laughed, but I maintained my composure, the perfect bride absorbed in the beauty of the ceremony. My law school roommate read a Pablo Neruda sonnet about belonging to each other, her voice clear and strong, unaware that the two people who had actually been belonging to each other stood on opposite sides of the altar. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Father Morrison reached the traditional pause in the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly through the church's perfect acoustics. If anyone here has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and the church fell into that expectant silence that always followed this question, everyone waiting for the moment to pass, so the real celebration could begin. That's when Rachel dropped her bouquet. The sound of flowers hitting marble echoed through the church like a gunshot. Every head turned toward her as she stepped forward, her empire waist bridesmaid dress no longer able to hide what was growing beneath it. Her voice cracked as she spoke the words that would shatter the perfect facade we had all been maintaining. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice starting weak but growing stronger with each word. "I can't let this continue. I can't stand here and watch this happen when I'm pregnant with Marcus's child." The congregation erupted. 300 people gasped in unison, a sound like wind through trees before a storm. Someone's champagne glass, brought in despite church rules, shattered on the floor. Marcus's mother stood up so quickly, her hat fell off her face, cycling through confusion, denial, and horror in the span of seconds. My mother reached for my father's hand, her mouth open in shock. The photographer, God bless him, kept shooting his camera, clicking rapidly to capture every second of the unfolding drama. But I didn't react the way they expected. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even look surprised. Instead, I turned slowly to face Rachel, my veil floating around me like a cloud, and smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile or a broken smile, but the satisfied smile of someone whose patience had finally been rewarded. "I've been waiting for you to finally tell everyone the truth," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church's excellent acoustics. "But you forgot to mention a few important details, didn't you, Rachel?" Her face went white, then gray, then a shade I had never seen on human skin before. She stumbled backward, and Emma caught her before she fell. Marcus stood frozen at the altar, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, no words coming out. For instance, I continued, turning to address the congregation like the lawyer I was trained to command a room and present evidence. "You forgot to mention that the affair has been going on for 6 months. You forgot to mention the hotels, the weekend trips, the jewelry purchased with money stolen from joint accounts. You forgot to mention that you're not the only one, that there was Jennifer before you and Sophia after, though I don't think you knew about them, did you?" Rachel's legs gave out completely and she sank onto the altar steps, her dress pooling around her. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. "Celeste, please, we can discuss this privately." Privately, I laughed, and the sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Like all those private discussions you had in hotel rooms. Like the private promises you made to each woman about leaving me after the wedding, no. Marcus, I think we're done with privacy. I think everyone here deserves to know exactly who they came to celebrate today." I pulled out my phone from the hidden pocket I'd had sewn into my dress specifically for this moment and sent a single text to Stan. Within seconds, the large screen that had been set up for the wedding slideshow flickered to life. But instead of photos of Marcus and me through the years, it showed the first slide of my carefully prepared presentation. The first image was Marcus and Rachel entering the Carlisle Hotel, time stamped 3 months ago. The next was them kissing in her apartment doorway. Then came screenshots of text messages, Marcus telling Rachel he loved her, Rachel begging him to leave me, Marcus promising it would all be over after the wedding. The congregation sat in stunned silence, unable to look away from the systematic destruction of 2 reputations. But the truly damaging slides were yet to come. Financial records showing the money Marcus had siphoned from our accounts, the non-disclosure agreement with Sophia the bartender, and then the piece de resistance evidence of Marcus's insider trading, complete with SEC filing numbers and transaction records. Each slide was perfectly timed, giving the audience just enough time to absorb the information before moving to the next revelation. Marcus lunged toward the screen, trying to stop the presentation, but 2 men in suits stood up from the 3rd row. FBI agents. Stan's friends who had been waiting for this moment. Agent Davies, one of them said, holding up his badge. "Mr. Reynolds, we need you to come with us. You're under arrest for securities fraud and insider trading." The church exploded into chaos. Guests were on their feet, some trying to leave, others pressing forward to see better. Marcus's boss from Goldman Sachs was on his phone, presumably with the company's legal department. The photographer had abandoned his artistic shots and was now documenting the arrest, knowing these photos would be worth more than any wedding album. Rachel was sobbing on the altar steps, her carefully applied makeup streaming down her face in black rivers. She looked up at me with eyes full of betrayal, as if I was the one who had wronged her. "You knew," she gasped between sobs. "This whole time you knew." I crouched down beside her, careful not to let my dress touch her tears, and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "I've known for 3 months. Every smile, every bridesmaid dress fitting, every time you helped me plan this wedding while carrying his child, I knew. How does it feel, Rachel, to have someone you trust completely betray you? To realize that every moment of friendship was a lie?" She had no answer, only more tears. Marcus was being handcuffed now, the silver circles clicking around his wrists with a finality that matched the end of everything we had built together. He looked at me over the FBI agent's shoulder, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You planned this," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're insane. You destroyed everything over jealousy." I stood up, smoothing my dress, and addressed him with the same calm I used in court. "I didn't destroy anything, Marcus. I simply revealed what was already broken. And for the record, the marriage wouldn't have been legal anyway. Your friend Kevin let his officiant certification lapse 6 months ago. I've had my lawyer here." I gestured to Patricia in the 3rd row, ready to handle any legal issues that might arise from this non-wedding. The FBI agents were leading Marcus out now, past 300 stunned guests, past his sobbing mother, past my father, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. As they reached the church doors, I called out one more thing. "Oh, and Marcus, that prenup you refused to sign. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. But the lawsuit I'm filing for emotional distress and fraud. That's very real. My firm will be in touch with yours, though. I suspect you won't have a firm much longer." The church doors closed behind Marcus and the FBI agents, with a sound that echoed through the stunned silence like the final note of a funeral dirge. 300 guests remained frozen in their pews, a tableau of shock and disbelief, dressed in their finest clothes. Rachel remained crumpled on the altar steps, her bridesmaid dress a puddle of dusty rose around her shaking form. The string quartet had stopped mid-note, their bows suspended in air as if time itself had paused to process what had just happened. I stood at the altar in my $20,000 dress. The train spread behind me like spilled milk and surveyed the wreckage of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The photographer was still shooting his camera, capturing the surreal aftermath of a wedding that had become a crime scene. My mother had buried her face in my father's shoulder, her mother of the bride hat askew. Marcus's mother had fainted and was being fanned by her sister, while someone called for medical assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, I address the congregation, my voice steady and clear. The reception at the Meadow Club has been paid for and will proceed as planned. The band is excellent, the food is exceptional, and the bar is fully stocked. Please consider it a celebration of truth rather than marriage. For those of you who feel uncomfortable attending, I understand completely. For those who'd like to stay and toast to new beginnings, you're most welcome. The silence that followed was broken by slow, steady applause from the back of the church. I looked up to see my law school professor, Howard Brennan, now a federal judge, standing and clapping with deliberate approval. Others joined him gradually, some out of shock, some out of admiration for the sheer audacity of what they had witnessed. Soon half the church was applauding while the other half sat in stunned disapproval. Rachel struggled to her feet using the altar for support. Her face was swollen from crying, mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint. She took a step toward me, her hand extended as if to grab my arm, but I stepped back, letting her hand fall into empty air. "Celeste, please," she whispered, her voice raw. "I need to explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at her, this woman who had been my sister in everything but blood, who had held my hair back when I was sick in college, who had been the first person I called when I got my job offer, who had helped me pick out the ring I thought Marcus would propose with. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have, but I had spent 3 months building scar tissue over it. "You need to explain," I asked, my voice carrying through the church. "What would you like to explain, Rachel? How you slept with my fiancé for 6 months? How you got pregnant with his child while helping me plan my wedding? How you stood there as my maid of honor, knowing you were carrying his baby? Which part would you like to explain?" "It just happened," she said, the classic defense of cheaters everywhere. "We didn't plan it. That night when you were in Chicago for the Morrison deposition, Marcus came over to help with your surprise birthday party planning, and we had wine, and one thing led to another. One thing led to another for 6 months, I interrupted. One thing led to another through dozens of hotel rooms, hundreds of text messages, thousands of lies. That's not something that just happens, Rachel. That's a choice you made every single day. But you don't understand," she pleaded, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "I love him. We love each other. We tried to fight it, but sometimes you can't control who you fall in love with." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Love, you think this is love, Rachel? He had 2 other women besides you. You were just the latest in a pattern. Check his phone records for someone named Sophia. Ask him about Jennifer from his office. You weren't special, you were just convenient. My best friend who he could trust to keep the secret." She shook her head violently, denial written across her features. "No, you're lying. You're trying to hurt me because I hurt you. Marcus loves me. He's leaving you for me." "Marcus is going to federal prison," I said flatly. "Securities fraud carries a sentence of up to 20 years. Insider trading adds another 5. Even with good lawyers, and he won't be able to afford good lawyers after Goldman Sachs fires him and freezes his accounts, he's looking at minimum 5 years. So congratulations, Rachel. You've won a baby whose father will be in federal prison and a reputation that will follow you for the rest of your life." My sister Emma stepped forward from the bridesmaid line, her face a mixture of sympathy and disgust. "Celeste, what do you want us to do?" she asked, gesturing to the other bridesmaids who stood frozen in their matching dresses. "Go to the reception," I told them. "Eat the food, drink the champagne, dance to the band. The Meadow Club is beautiful in October and everything's already paid for. Make it a party to remember, just not for the reasons we originally planned." I turned to address specific sections of the congregation. "Partners from Brennan, Hayes and Associates, thank you for coming. I'll see you Monday morning, where I expect to make senior partner after this demonstration of strategic thinking and execution. Marcus's colleagues from Goldman Sachs, you might want to check your own trades from the past year. The FBI will be investigating everyone in his department. Friends and family, I'm sorry you had to witness this, but I'm not sorry it happened. Sometimes the truth needs an audience." Father Morrison, who had remained silent throughout the chaos, finally spoke. "My child," he said gently, "are you all right? This is a tremendous burden you've carried alone." "I'm better than all right, Father. For the first time in months, I can breathe freely. There's something liberating about not having to pretend anymore. I began walking down the aisle, my train dragging behind me like a cape. The congregation parted, some reaching out to touch my arm in support, others pulling back as if betrayal might be contagious. When I reached my parents, I stopped. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," I said to them. "But if you had known, you would have tried to handle it quietly, privately, with dignity." And Marcus and Rachel didn't deserve dignity. They deserved exactly this. My father, the man who had taught me to never show weakness in business, pulled me into a fierce hug. "You're a force to be reckoned with, sweetheart. Remind me never to cross you." As I continued toward the door, I heard Rachel calling after me, her voice breaking with desperation. "What am I supposed to do now? I'm pregnant and alone, and everyone knows what I did. How am I supposed to live with this?" I paused at the church entrance, turning back one final time. "The same way I lived with it for 3 months, Rachel. One day at a time, knowing that someone you trusted completely betrayed you. The difference is, your betrayal is public while mine was private. Your scarlet letter is visible while mine was hidden. But at least you have one thing I didn't have. You have the truth. No more lies to maintain, no more secrets to keep. In a way, I've given you a gift. You're free now. Free to figure out who you really are when you're not pretending to be my best friend or Marcus's secret lover." The October sun was brilliant as I stepped outside the church. The FBI vehicles were gone, having taken Marcus to be processed. Wedding guests were streaming out behind me, some heading to their cars to leave others discussing whether to attend the reception. The photographer appeared at my elbow, his camera still ready. "Ms. Chen," he said carefully, "I know this isn't what you planned, but these photos, they're powerful, raw, real. Would you like me to continue documenting the day?" "Absolutely," I told him. "Every moment. This isn't the wedding album I planned, but it's the one I'll treasure. The day I stood up for myself in front of everyone who mattered." A Lincoln town car pulled up, my escape vehicle arranged by Stan, who had thought of everything. As I climbed in, careful with my dress, even though it would never be worn again, I saw Rachel emerge from the church supported by 2 bridesmaids. Our eyes met across the space that now seemed infinite. She mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," but I had already turned away, looking forward through the windshield at the road ahead. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to miss the Meadow Club," I said. "I have a party to host." The reception hall was a study in cognitive dissonance. Everything was perfectly arranged as if for a wedding celebration, round tables with white linens and gold chargers, centerpieces of white orchids and roses that had cost $500 each. A 5-tier wedding cake decorated with sugar flowers so realistic you could mistake them for fresh blooms. But instead of a bride and groom's entrance, there was just me in my wedding dress, standing alone at the microphone. About 150 guests had decided to attend, the ones who were either too curious to leave or genuinely wanted to support me. The band professionals, who had probably seen everything in their careers, vamped jazz standards while people found their seats. Waiters circulated with champagne and canapes, unsure whether to proceed with service as planned. I nodded to them to continue. "The food shouldn't go to waste because of Marcus's crimes. I know this isn't the celebration any of us expected," I said into the microphone, my voice steady, despite the surreal nature of the moment. "But life rarely goes according to plan. 3 months ago, I discovered that the 2 people I trusted most in the world were betraying me in the worst possible way. I could have confronted them privately, handled it quietly, maintained everyone's dignity. But dignity is earned through actions, not protected through silence. So today, instead of celebrating a lie, we're toasting to truth." Judge Brennan raised his champagne glass from table 3. To truth, he echoed, and the rest of the room followed suit. The reception proceeded with a bizarre festivity. People ate the herb-crusted lamb and pan-seared salmon, drank the carefully selected wines, even danced when the band played. My law school friends formed a protective circle around me, keeping away anyone who might want to probe for gossip rather than offer support. My sister Emma gave an impromptu speech about strength and resilience that had half the room in tears. Around 9 o'clock, as the sun was setting over the Atlantic, visible through the club's panoramic windows, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but I recognized the writing style immediately. It was Jennifer Marcus's previous affair writing from London. Just saw the news on social media. He did the same to me. Promised me everything delivered, nothing but heartbreak. You're my hero for exposing him. If you need testimony for any legal proceedings, I'm ready to video conference from here. Solidarity, Jennifer. Other messages followed throughout the evening. Women from Marcus's past reaching out with their own stories, colleagues from Goldman Sachs sharing suspicions they'd had, but never voiced, even Rachel's sister saying she had tried to warn Rachel, but was ignored. Each message was another confirmation that I had done the right thing, even if it wasn't the polite thing. By 11 o'clock, the reception was winding down. The cake had been cut and distributed, though the traditional bride and groom figurines had been discreetly removed. The band played their final song, At Last, by Etta James, which seemed ironically appropriate. Guests approached me throughout the evening, some offering condolences, as if someone had died, others offering congratulations, as if I had won a victory. Both were right in their own way. Patricia Chen. My lawyer pulled me aside near the end of the night. The FBI is building a solid case, she informed me. With the evidence you provided, Marcus is looking at serious time. Also, Goldman Sachs called. They're firing him effective immediately and will likely pursue civil charges to recover any illegal gains. You should also know that Rachel tried to call me about representation for a paternity suit. I obviously declined due to conflict of interest. As the last guest departed, I stood alone in the reception hall, surrounded by the debris of what was supposed to be my perfect day. The centerpieces were wilting, the cake had been reduced to crumbs, the dance floor was empty except for a few rose petals that had fallen from someone's corsage. The wedding coordinator approached tentatively, unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. Ms. Chen, she said carefully, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like tonight. That took incredible courage. Or incredible stupidity, I replied, finally allowing exhaustion to creep into my voice. No, she said firmly. Courage. Most people would have gone through with it to save face, then dealt with it privately later. You chose truth over comfort, justice over politeness. That's rare. I walked out of the Meadow Club, still wearing my wedding dress, the train now slightly gray from dragging across floors all evening. Stan was waiting in the parking lot, my regular clothes in a bag in his car. The good private investigator he was, he had anticipated I would need an escape plan. Your apartment's been cleared of Marcus's belongings, he informed me as I climbed into his SUV. Changed the locks too, and installed a security system. Also thought you should know Rachel's been trying to reach Marcus all evening. She doesn't seem to understand that he's in federal custody without bail pending arraignment Monday morning. What will happen to her? I asked, surprising myself with a flicker of concern for the woman who had betrayed me so completely. Stan shrugged. That's up to her. She's got family in Ohio. Might be best if she disappeared there for a while, had the baby quietly started over. Though with social media, these things follow you forever now. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, I returned to work at Brennan Hayes and Associates. Walking through the gleaming lobby of our 42nd floor offices in Midtown Manhattan felt like entering a different universe, one where my dramatic weekend was already legend. The security guard, who usually just nodded, now looked at me with something between awe and fear. The receptionist actually stood up when I passed, as if royalty had entered the building. My office had been transformed in my absence. The modest bouquet of roses Marcus had sent every Monday, a gesture I once thought romantic but now understood as guilt management, had been replaced with an enormous arrangement of red dahlias and white orchids from the senior partners. The card simply read, "Welcome back, warrior." My assistant Diane had fielded over 200 calls and had a stack of messages that looked like a small phone book. Howard Brennan himself, the founding partner and my former professor, appeared in my doorway before I could even sit down. He was 73, silver-haired, and had the kind of presence that made opposing counsel reconsider their life choices. He studied me for a long moment, then smiled the same smile I'd seen him wear after particularly brutal cross-examinations. In my 47 years of practicing law, he said, settling into one of my client chairs, I've seen every kind of strategy imaginable. But what you did Saturday was a masterclass in evidence presentation and psychological warfare. The FBI called me yesterday. They want to know if you'd consider consulting on white-collar crime cases. I'm a corporate lawyer, not a criminal prosecutor. I reminded him, finally sitting in my own chair, the leather still molded to my shape despite everything that had changed. You're whatever you want to be now, Celeste. That's what I came to tell you. The partners met this morning. Unanimous vote. You're being made senior partner effective immediately. Youngest in the firm's history. Your new office is on 45, the corner one with the park view. And we want you to head the new financial crimes division we're creating. Senior partner. At 32, I had achieved what usually took lawyers until their 40s to accomplish. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's betrayal had inadvertently catapulted my career forward. His crimes had become my credentials. There's more, Howard continued. We've been contacted by 3 women who want to pursue civil cases against Marcus for fraud and emotional distress. They specifically requested you as representation. Additionally, Goldman Sachs wants to retain us for the internal investigation with you leading. Your intimate knowledge of Marcus's methods would be invaluable. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing the cases building against Marcus. The FBI had frozen all his assets, including the apartment we had shared. Goldman Sachs was conducting a forensic audit that had already uncovered more insider trading than my evidence had revealed. His passport had been confiscated, his licenses suspended, his entire life dismantled in 72 hours. The man who had everything had lost it all, and I was being asked to help ensure he never got it back. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Rachel's mother, Patricia, calling from Cleveland. Her voice was tired, guided with the exhaustion that comes from dealing with family scandal. Celeste. I know I have no right to call you, she began, but I need to know what really happened. Rachel is here, she's hysterical, she's pregnant, and she keeps saying you set her up, that you knew all along and trapped her. I told Patricia everything from discovering the affair to gathering evidence to the wedding revelation. She listened without interrupting, occasionally sighing heavily. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I tried to warn her, Patricia finally said. When she told me she had feelings for Marcus 6 months ago, I told her to distance herself, to remember that he was your fiancé, that you were her best friend. But she said love doesn't follow rules. I told her that betrayal follows you forever. But she wouldn't listen. How is she? I asked, surprising myself again with residual concern. Physically, she's fine. The pregnancy is progressing normally. Emotionally, she's destroyed. She can't understand how Marcus could have had other women. She thought she was special. She keeps saying she's sorry, but also that you shouldn't have humiliated her publicly. She doesn't seem to grasp that she humiliated herself the moment she slept with your fiancé. If she needs anything for the baby, I said, then stopped. What was I offering? Why did I care? You're a better person than most would be in this situation, Patricia said softly. I'll tell her you asked. Maybe someday, years from now, when the wounds have scarred over, you two can have a conversation. But not now. Now she needs to live with what she's done. The New York Post ran the story on Tuesday with the headline, Wedding of the Century Becomes Arrest of the Year. Someone, probably a guest, had leaked photos to them. The image of Marcus being led out in handcuffs while I stood in my wedding dress was on the front page. The Daily News followed with, Bride's Revenge Served Ice Cold. By Wednesday, it had gone viral on social media with hashtags like Wedding Revenge and Bride of the Year trending. My inbox became a mixture of interview requests, book deal offers, and messages from women sharing their own stories of betrayal. Oprah's producers called. Netflix wanted to buy the rights to my story. Publishers were offering 6-figure advances for a tell-all memoir. I declined them all. This wasn't entertainment, it was my life. On Thursday, I had my first session with Dr. Sarah Lindstrom, a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma. Patricia Chen had recommended her, saying that even the strongest people needed help processing this level of deception. The office was in a brownstone on the Upper West Side, all soft colors and comfortable furniture designed to make people feel safe enough to fall apart. "You held it together for 3 months," Dr. Lindstrom observed after I told her the story. "You turned your pain into planning, your hurt into strategy. That takes incredible emotional control. But now that it's over, what are you feeling?" I considered the question. What was I feeling? Relief, victory. Sadness. All of them and none of them cycling through me like an emotional kaleidoscope that never settled on one color. "Empty," I finally admitted. "I feel empty." For 3 months, the plan consumed me. Every day was about gathering evidence, maintaining the facade, preparing for the revelation. Now that it's done, I don't know what to do with myself. I won, but what did I win? "You won your freedom," she said simply. "Freedom from a man who didn't deserve you, from a friend who didn't value you, from a life that was built on lies." Empty isn't bad, Celeste. Empty is space for something new. That evening I went to my apartment for the first time since the wedding. Stan had been thorough in removing Marcus's presence. The closet that had held his suits was empty. The bathroom was missing his cologne and expensive skincare products. The office that had been his was now just a room with a desk and empty bookshelves. It was like he had been digitally erased from my life, leaving clean spaces where memories used to live. I poured myself a glass of the good wine, the Chateau Margaux we had been saving for our first anniversary, and stood at the window looking out at Central Park. The trees were in full autumn glory, reds and golds and oranges that looked like fire in the setting sun. Couples walked hand in hand on the paths below, and I waited for the pang of loneliness, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Family dinner Sunday. Mom and Dad want to see you, but don't know how to ask. They're proud of you, but also worried. You know how they are." I smiled at my sister's diplomacy. My parents, traditional Korean Americans who valued harmony and face above all else, were probably mortified by the public nature of the scandal, while simultaneously impressed by my strategic execution. Sunday dinner would be awkward, but it was family. The family you're born with, not the one you choose, and who chooses to betray you. That night I sat at my computer and began writing. Not a tell-all book or a revenge manifesto, but a legal article about financial crimes in romantic relationships, how emotional manipulation often accompanied financial fraud. It was scholarly, detached, professional. But between the lines, it was my story transformed into something useful for other women who might find themselves where I had been. By midnight, I had written 10 pages. The words flowed like they had been waiting to escape, each sentence another step away from the woman who had stood at that altar in a $20,000 dress. I was becoming someone new, someone who had been forged in betrayal but refused to be defined by it. 6 months after the wedding, spring had arrived in New York with its promise of renewal. The trees in Central Park were budding, with new green couples were emerging from winter hibernation to claim benches and patches of grass, and I had settled into my new normal. The corner office on the 45th floor had become my sanctuary, with its panoramic views of Manhattan and shelves lined with legal volumes and the awards that had started accumulating. The financial crimes division I headed had already recovered $12 million in assets from white-collar criminals, with Marcus's case being our flagship victory. His trial had concluded 2 weeks ago with a guilty verdict on all counts. 7 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release for 5. The courtroom had been packed with press and curiosity seekers, but I hadn't attended. I was deposed as a witness, but never had to testify. My evidence spoke for itself. Goldman Sachs had terminated 40% of Marcus's department after our investigation uncovered widespread irregularities. The SEC issued new regulations based on the patterns we identified. I had become inadvertently one of the most feared and respected attorneys in financial crime. The woman scorned had become the woman who changed an industry. Rachel had given birth to a son in March. I knew this only because Patricia, her mother, had sent me a brief email with no pictures, just the facts. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Healthy. named James after Rachel's grandfather, not Marcus. They were living in Cleveland now, Rachel working at a local marketing firm that didn't know her history. The internet had mostly moved on to new scandals, though her name would forever be linked to that day, if anyone Googled deep enough. I was reviewing depositions when Diane knocked on my door. "You have a visitor," she said with an expression I couldn't read. "She says she's your former maid of honor." Rachel stood in my office doorway like a ghost from another life. She had lost weight, her face gaunt and aged beyond her 31 years. Her designer clothes had been replaced with a simple sundress and cardigan that looked like they came from Target. She held a baby carrier in one hand and a diaper bag in the other, the universal equipment of new motherhood, making her almost unrecognizable as the woman who had stood at that altar 6 months ago. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I could have said no. I had every right to refuse her. But curiosity won over caution. I nodded to a chair and she settled herself, carefully placing the carrier on the floor. The baby was sleeping, his face a mixture of features that were unmistakably Marcus's. The same green eyes visible even through closed lids, the same angular jawline already evident in miniature. "Why are you here, Rachel?" I asked, keeping my desk between us like a barrier. "I needed to see you," she said, her eyes filling with tears she was clearly fighting. "I've started therapy. Dr. Morrison says I need to make amends, real amends, not just apologies. I need to own what I did without excuses or explanations." "And what did you do?" I asked, curious if she really understood. She took a shaky breath. "I betrayed my best friend in the worst possible way. I slept with your fiancé for 6 months while pretending to be supportive of your relationship. I helped you plan your wedding while carrying his child. I stood next to you at the altar, knowing I was pregnant, and still let you go through with it until my guilt finally overwhelmed my selfishness. I destroyed our friendship, your trust, and my own integrity for a man who was also sleeping with other women." The words hung between us, honest and raw. She wasn't minimizing or deflecting. This was real acknowledgement. "I also came to thank you," she continued, which surprised me. "You could have let me marry him eventually, let me find out about the others after it was too late. You could have waited until after James was born to reveal everything, ensuring maximum damage to an innocent child. You could have destroyed me completely, but you didn't. You gave me the truth when I needed it, even though I didn't deserve it." "You're raising Marcus's son alone," I observed, looking at the sleeping baby. "Not Marcus's son," she corrected. "My son. Marcus signed away parental rights in exchange for me not pursuing child support. He didn't want any reminders of his old life following him to prison. James will grow up knowing his biological father was a criminal, but he'll also know his mother learned from her mistakes." We sat in silence for a moment. Two women who had once shared everything, now separated by an unbridgeable chasm. The baby stirred, making small sounds that weren't quite crying, but threatened to become so. "I should go," Rachel said, standing and gathering her things. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I thought was love was just excitement at taking something that wasn't mine. What Marcus and I had was built on betrayal, so it could never have been real. What you and I had was real, and I destroyed it for an illusion. Take care of yourself, Rachel," I said, meaning it. "And take care of James. He doesn't deserve to pay for his parents' mistakes." She paused at the door, turning back one more time. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered the question honestly. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. Maybe someday I'll forgive you for my own peace, not for yours. But forgiveness doesn't mean we can ever be friends again. Some betrayals break things that can't be repaired. She nodded understanding in her eyes and left. I watched from my window as she emerged from the building 45 floors below, a tiny figure navigating the crowded sidewalk with a baby carrier and diaper bag, disappearing into the city that swallows everyone's stories eventually. That evening, I attended a charity gala for the New York Bar Association. These events had become part of my new routine, networking and building relationships that had nothing to do with my former life. I wore a black cocktail dress that cost less than 1/10 of my wedding dress, but made me feel more myself than that elaborate gown ever had. At the bar waiting for my wine, someone said my name. I turned to find a man I didn't recognize, tall with kind eyes and prematurely silver hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. He introduced himself as James Wright, a federal prosecutor who had worked on Marcus's case. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice carrying a slight Boston accent. "Your evidence was impeccable. Most civilian discoveries have gaps we have to fill, but yours was prosecution ready. Have you ever considered working for the Justice Department?" "I'm happy where I am," I replied, taking my wine from the bartender. "I can understand that," he said, then paused as if considering whether to continue. "I also wanted to say that what you did took incredible courage. Most people would have fallen apart or sought private revenge. You chose justice even though it cost you everything. It didn't cost me everything I corrected him. It cost me illusions. It cost me false friends and a lying fiancé. What I kept my integrity, my self-respect, my career was worth more than what I lost." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Not to discuss cases or Marcus or anything related to that. Just dinner between two people who understand that sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing." I studied him for a moment. He was attractive in an understated way, intelligent, clearly successful. But more than that, he was someone who had seen me at my most vengeful and still saw someone worth knowing. "Dinner would be nice," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. We exchanged numbers and he promised to call the next week. As he walked away, I realized this was the first time since discovering Marcus's betrayal that I had felt attracted to someone. Not just physically, but intellectually, emotionally. The ice I had encased myself in was beginning to thaw. A year after the wedding, I stood in the same church in the Hamptons. Not for another wedding, but for a memorial service for Father Morrison the priest, who had presided over so many moments of joy and sorrow for the community. The church was packed with families he had married, children he had baptized, mourners he had comforted. I sat in a middle pew, anonymous among the crowd. Halfway through the service, someone slid in beside me. I glanced over to see Marcus's mother, Janet, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. She didn't speak, just reached over and squeezed my hand once before folding her hands back in her lap. After the service, she found me in the churchyard. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I raised Marcus to be better than he was. His father and I failed somewhere, created a son who thought he could take whatever he wanted without consequences. What you did at the wedding was harsh, but it was what he deserved. I'm sorry for the pain my son caused you. I had never expected an apology from Marcus's family. They had lost everything too, their reputation, their social standing, their son to prison. But here was his mother taking responsibility for sins that weren't entirely hers." "Thank you, Janet," I said simply. "That means more than you know." She nodded and walked away back to her car where Marcus's father waited, a broken man who had retired early from his law firm because of the scandal. They were collateral damage in their son's crimes, innocent bystanders who got hit by shrapnel from the explosion. As I drove back to the city, I thought about forgiveness again. Not for Marcus, never for Marcus, but for myself. For the woman who had been blind to the betrayal happening in front of her. For the woman who had trusted too easily and loved too freely. That woman deserved forgiveness, deserved compassion, deserved to be released from the constant self-recrimination that whispered she should have known, should have seen, should have been less naive. That night, James Wright called as promised. We set a dinner date for the following Friday, a small Italian place in the village that he promised had the best carbonara outside of Rome. It was a beginning, tentative and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. As I fell asleep that night in my apartment that no longer held any ghosts, I thought about the woman who had stood at that altar a year ago in a $20,000 dress, holding a bouquet of white orchids, ready to promise her life to a man who had already betrayed her. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that the devastation she was about to experience would transform her into someone stronger, more successful, more authentic than she could imagine. But she had to go through it first. The humiliation, the betrayal, the public spectacle, the private grief. She had to stand at that altar and smile as her world exploded, knowing she had choreographed every moment of the destruction. She had to become me, the woman who survived, who thrived, who turned betrayal into triumph. Looking back, would I do it again? Would I orchestrate that public humiliation? Destroy 2 lives in front of 300 witnesses, turn my wedding into a crime scene? The answer came without hesitation. Yes, because some betrayals demand more than private tears and quiet divorces. Some betrayals demand a reckoning that everyone can see, that no one can deny or minimize or excuse. Marcus took 6 months of my life. Rachel took 15 years of friendship. Together they took my ability to trust without question, to love without doubt. But in revealing their betrayal so spectacularly, I took back my power. I refused to be the victim in their story. I became the author of my own narrative, even if that narrative included a wedding that ended with handcuffs instead of honeymoon tickets. Do you think revenge is justified when someone betrays you so completely? Have you ever discovered a betrayal that changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted them privately or chosen the public revelation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, please like and subscribe. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that surviving betrayal is possible, that there is life and even love on the other side of devastation. Thank you for listening to my story. May you never need the strength I had to find, but if you do, know that it exists within you. Sometimes the best wedding gift you can receive is the truth, even when it arrives wrapped in heartbreak and delivered with handcuffs. The marriage would have been a prison. The betrayal revealed was my key to freedom. And freedom, I've learned, is worth any price, even a wedding that became a crime scene, a best friend who became a stranger, and a future that looked nothing like the one I had planned. Because the future I have now, the one I built from the ashes of that disaster, is truly mine. And that makes all the difference.